Welcome to the Rebecca Randall Bryan Art Gallery. If you've been here before, it's nice to have you back. If this is your first time, I'm going to say welcome again. Rebecca Randall Bryan gave a little bit of money to the university so that we could bring in artists from all over the country to share their work and ideas with us. Today we have David Bogus, all the way from the mid-central seaboard of the United States. Thank you for joining us today. Had to travel by airliner to get here, like a god in the sky. An aluminum tube in an easy chair.
Via the New Jersey Turnpike.
Via the New Jersey Turnpike.
Which is more dangerous than the plane.
David Bogus was born in Fall River, Massachusetts. He holds an MFA from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and a BFA from the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth. He's taught at a variety of institutions, including the University of Idaho, the University of Wyoming, Texas A&M International University, Eastern Kentucky University, as well as some that he'll tell you about today. Bogus was selected as a 2015 NCECA Emerging Artist. What's NCECA stand for?
The National Council for the Education of the Ceramic Arts.
And
I think I got that right.
Those of you who are studying studio arts and with an emphasis in ceramics will probably have opportunities to hopefully travel to some of the conferences.
Conference not next week, the week after.
Week after next.
In Cincinnati.
Ooh, cool. He's shown his work both internationally and nationally at various venues, including...
That's a tough one.
Icheon World Ceramic Center in South Korea, Algeria Center for Contemporary Art in Newark, New Jersey, and the Carbondale Clay Center in Carbondale, Colorado, as well as many others. Please join me in giving a big coastal welcome to Mr. David Bogus.
Thank you. Hi everybody, thanks for coming. Appreciate y'all coming in. I want to first say thanks for having me, Jim and everybody at the university. It's so generous, all the financials and whatnot to make this happen, and sending me down here and getting the work down here and me not paying the shipping is amazing. So I'm very thankful and a lot of gratitude for the opportunity today. I'm David Bogus, and today I'd just like to talk to you a little bit about sort of my story and how I got to making all this stuff. All my work and all my artwork is about my identity. So my identity is Bogus. That is my real last name. It comes from a small town in Ukraine that got cut off to make it sound more English by my ancestors when they came here. The other thing I think that my work is about, all work is about, is creativity. And to me, creativity means a couple things. It's a little bit about exploring your identity, which I often said. And then I think there's also something about finding many possibilities for one particular problem. So you're going to see I've worked, even though you see ceramics here, I've worked on lots of different media, tried lots of different things. So hopefully you'll see sort of the progression of how I started and how I ended up here. Okay? So the first part about identity, I think, is sort of where you're from. So this is Fall River on the left, and you see the bridge, and there's a little town called Somerset on the right. And where you're from, I think, has so much about, wrapped up in your identity and who you are. And so Somerset was a pottery town. And so we had a great high school teacher, and that's sort of how I started making ceramics and got interested in it. It was also a very maritime town. They built ships there. So metal and metal casting was a big part of my town. And you'll see sort of that start to creep up in my work. And again, I use those materials as a means to sort of make a metaphor for who I am, where I'm from, and my identity. So I went to University of Massachusetts Dartmouth. It's about 20 minutes from where I grew up. Stayed at home, drove to school, saved a lot of money. It's good to not have student debt when you're an artist. And I was very lucky to study with a couple professors there. Chris Guston and Karen Doherty. Their work couldn't have been more different. Chris does these sort of abstract, expressionist sort of tile things and big pots, and you can see online he's a really famous ceramic artist. And then Karen, unfortunately, she passed away the year I graduated. And her work is more about telling stories about herself, and that's her and her husband, Louis. So there's a little bit of both of their work in how I started making things. I think one of the things when you start making artwork is, I call it the 3 I's, or one of my professors called it 3 I's. You imitate first, and then you incorporate what you do with what you're imitating, and then you sort of innovate on it. So hopefully you'll see sort of that progression. So right off the bat, this is Chris's wood kiln. So this was very influential to me as a ceramic artist. It's one of those things that community is really comes to the forefront, and this was what it looked like when they first built it. I was there for the first firing, and then 20 years later, there's all of us that we've known each other forever that have come fired Chris's kiln, and it was so influential to me, all these different folks that I met at UMass Dartmouth, and the connection and that family from spending all those hours firing the wood kiln. Super important to who I am and what sort of made me the artist I am today. So this is some of my stuff from undergraduate, so very much where you guys are right now. This is sort of the pieces I was making. There's sort of half of what Chris does. You can kind of see the sort of abstract expressionist kind of forms that I'm putting together in my pots. And then you'll notice those little squares in the front. Those sort of represent those factories I showed you from Fall River. So I started to make things that sort of told a story about who I was at the time. So I used a lot of animals and different sort of myths and iconography. These were fired in that wood kiln that I showed you. And so after I graduated college, I was lucky enough to get accepted and be a resident at Peters Valley Craft Center, which is in New Jersey. I never sort of lived anywhere else but Massachusetts, so this is the first time I moved away. And I was lucky enough to spend 2 years there. And so I sort of continued what I was making. And the great thing about Peters Valley is in the summers, there's a different workshop instructor every week. So imagine having like 10 teachers in the matter of a summer. And so all that stuff starts to creep into my work. And over the 2 years, I was able to sort of build these sort of pieces that would help my portfolio to get into graduate school. So you can see how I started to use color, and I'm starting to refine my forms. And then on these are all different kind of symbols of, and you can kind of see the high heel there, symbols of who I was, and starting to take shape on the form of pots. So after 2 years there, I put together my portfolio, and I got to go to school at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, Nebraska. Again, never lived anywhere off the East Coast and moved somewhere totally different, didn't know anybody. Totally changed my life and my work. And so these are a couple of my professors at University of Nebraska. The one is Eddie Dominguez on the left, and that's Pete Pinnell on the right. So I had both the sculptural and the functional sort of influences at the time. Eddie is a very kind of passionate person. He makes things based on sort of his feelings and what he wants to say in his work. So he has that big crucifix, again, telling the story of his life and growing up and his experience with Catholicism. And Pete on the right was very interested in Chinese pottery. And so that's a copper red glaze. I'm not sure how many ceramics folks are in here, but he is very interested in Chinese ceramics. And he went over to China and studied these glazes and basically analyzed the molecular formulas and used our materials here in the States to sort of make these beautiful glazes. So very sort of technically driven in ceramics, material and process oriented. So I started to kind of think about art in three ways. One way is sort of the concept, what you want to say, what ideas you want to put out there. The second part I think about when I'm making my work is the material and process. So in the studio, playing around, having different ideas come from the actual process of making, which you sort of see as I go along. And then the third thing I think about is the formal elements, line, color, shape, form. So that's sort of how I started to think about art in graduate school. That's what they were teaching me. And of course, they tried to push you into sort of figuring out what it is you're doing. So when I got there, I started making sort of very much the same things I was making as an undergraduate with these forms. The one on the left is a lantern, and the one on the right is a planter. And different sort of clay processes I was using. One is Sager fired, one's electric fired. Getting back to that copper red, there's a copper red. That's Pete's glaze over there, that little purse that's sitting over there. Forget to mention that. So about halfway through graduate school, I went to Florida, in the Bahia Honda in the Florida Keys. My girlfriend at the time was living down there. So she wanted to go swimming in the ocean, so we sort of drifted off the coast, and in the Keys, like, you can walk like almost like a quarter mile out into the ocean, and you're in waist deep water. And then all of a sudden the tide comes in, and then you're in 20 feet of water. So we started to swim back, and she yelled, "Shark!" And I totally had a panic attack. That's one of the parts about me, I have panic attacks. And I almost drowned, and she sort of saved my life. The next day, she made me go snorkeling, and I did not want to go back in the ocean. I did not want to jump off a boat, 8 miles off the shore and look at the coral reef, but I did anyways. And so you can kind of see the beauty of the life underneath the ocean there. Again, growing up where I grew up in Massachusetts was by the ocean, so you'll see as I go along a lot of the things from the ocean I put in my work. Again, to speak about my identity. This is my thesis show from graduate school. I wanted to sort of talk about that near-death experience that I had in the ocean. It's one of the projects I give to my students, make something about a near-death experience. So I sort of give problems to my students of things that I've worked on myself. So this is sort of what I came up with for my thesis. I did some paintings you can see in the back. But all these things are like the things I saw underneath the ocean at Bahia Honda Key and in the coral reef. And I wanted to make it really large, and it kind of was a metaphor for the feeling I had drowning in the ocean. Like, you start drowning and you feel like the ocean is so big and you feel like this little speck. So that's what got me sort of interested in installation, to make pieces that were so big that the viewer sort of felt immersed in it, sort of like I did in the ocean. So there's another pic of it. You can see how big it is. That's my friend Lou that I met at Peters Valley. He's one of my best friends to this day. But you can got to get a sense of the scale of that piece. So after graduate school, my first job was a lecturer at Green Mountain College in Vermont. And right away, you realize that there's a lot less resources when you leave schools. The University of Nebraska had everything, sort of similar to what you have here. You guys have a foundry, you have kilns. Green Mountain College had very little in that way. So you kind of have to scale back your work or think about making your work in a different way. So I started to think about making multiples. And so this is one of the first pieces I made there. It's called Brutus. And I was thinking exactly about the graduate life I had for 3 years in Lincoln. So I'll leave it to your imagination, but those are knives, so you can be backstabbed. There's a lot of politics as you start to move through academia. So I was sort of coming to terms with some of the emotions that I felt sort of leaving graduate school, and that whole experience of working with other graduate students, and sort of the politics and the acrimony that sort of happens. So I think you'll see it's kind of also my work can be sort of therapy for myself to sort of deal with some of the emotions I was having, and sort of, again, moving around to different places, and relegating that to the work and figuring that out, my feelings in the work. And again, that sort of goes into the identity part of who I am, and putting that into my work and figuring that out. After I was at Green Mountain College for a year, I got the chance to spend a summer at Archie Bray Foundation. It's in Helena, Montana. It's like the playground or Disney World for ceramics, if you will. They have all the kilns, all the stuff, and I think one of the best parts about being at Archie Bray were the people. And I think about my work being kind of coming from three different things: people and the places I've gone to, and how that influenced me, and then the processes of the work. So started thinking about multiples, and again, thinking about the ocean and all the stuff that's in the ocean, and sort of the idea of everything being in a net and feeling trapped in something was sort of something I was feeling. Kind of being out there as an artist, I didn't know what my next step was going to be, where I was going to work, where I was going to, how I was going to make a living. So I sort of felt trapped in this sort of this insecurity, almost, if you will. So that's sort of putting things in a net sort of was a metaphor for that. And again, the ocean and all, using fish and hooks and whatnot, harping back to, again, where I'm from, where I grew up, identity. So luckily at the Archie Bray, and speaking about those networking opportunities and meeting people, they helped me get a job at University of Idaho. And you can sort of see my studio there. I didn't show a lot of my drawing and painting, but I work in all different mediums. So whether it's sculpture with ceramics, drawing and painting with different paints and materials, or it's bronze casting, as you'll see, I try to weave my ideas through all those things. So I was thinking about those pots that I was making and all those things I was carving on them. And instead of being in a pot, what else could I make with that? So I thought about these frames. And you can see I did some collaborations with my other friend who made paintings, so I made some frames for his paintings. But all those stories and all those different icons that I was using to tell the story, instead of being wrapped around a pot, were now wrapped around a mirror or a painting. So one of my students, Todd, he was a graduate student. This is the first time I work with graduate students. And I really was inspired by his work and how he started to use mixed media in his work. So these are like these fictional machines that he made out of clay. So there's clay parts, but there's also, he took apart vacuum cleaners and hoses and whatnot. And so he just really inspired me to kind of, again, push myself to think about other materials and maybe starting to put other materials in my work and figuring out what else I could do. What other possibilities? Again, going back to that creativity, being about finding different solutions to the same problem of making your work. So this was one of the best experiences of my life. I got to go to Roswell Artist in Residence Foundation. It's a year-long residency. It's called The Gift of Time. They give you a nice check every month. They give you a house. They give you some materials, and you have a big show at the end. And so I was the first person on the new compound. There was an old compound. It's been there almost 50 years now. I think it was the 40th anniversary when I was there. So I was the first person on this brand new compound. It was really fun, but they didn't have the ceramics facilities yet. So there were no kilns there. It wasn't sort of what I was used to. So I started to, I came up with the idea of making some molds. So I would take, and you can kind of see the fish and this parts of those frames, and I started making latex molds so I could cast them in concrete. And so this particular process, you can kind of see the castings there. I'd make concrete and hydrocal, which is like a hard plaster they use for dental work, and fiberglass, and like smearing that inside the molds and then pouring urethane boat foam in. So it made these things look like concrete and super heavy pieces of work, but they're very, very light, like a Nerf ball. You could throw them around like a Nerf ball, they won't break. But again, like it's the first time I thought about using molds and learning the mold making process so I could transfer the one material to the other. So instead of being clay, it became concrete. And one of the things in my life that I've done to make money other than art is be a bartender. I really like the social aspect. I think it has a lot to do with teaching and dealing with customers and customer satisfaction and listening mostly. When you're a bartender, a part of the job is to listen to your customers, and that's what makes them want to come back and be regulars. So it was something that I wanted to make some artwork about. So this is me in my opening with my professor's son. And I thought about sort of performance. Again, being one of the sort of another option for me and trying that out. I'm the bartender as a piece of artwork, and there's a happening that's going on around it. And so this is what my bar looks like, and it's in the Roswell. It's in the Roswell Contemporary Art Museum. I think that's what it's called. No, it's called the Anderson. There's two. This is the Anderson Contemporary. And what this museum is they buy a piece from the residency. Every resident that goes, they'll purchase a piece when you leave. And so they bought my bar. And so the bar actually functions. So it's sort of, I'm walking the line between functional work and sculptural work and installation and performance in this piece. And a few years later, they wanted to move it 5 feet so it was up against the wall and cut a door in it. So I called up my friend Lou. We drove to Roswell and we took it apart and moved it. It's just, I'm so lucky to have that there. And every time there's an opening for the resident artist, they come over to the Anderson Museum and they serve drinks at my bar. So it's just really neat, and they won't let me bartend there because I was too poorly behaved. But I like to go visit it and drink at my bar every once in a while. So after I got done with that residency, I moved back home to Providence and Pawtucket, and these are sort of mill buildings there. My wife at the time was going to school at Rhode Island School of Design. So I just, I got a studio, rented a studio, did bartending, and I didn't really know what to make. To be honest, I just kind of finished that big installation, and it took me maybe 3 years, and I think a lot of my work, including this Bogus Boutique, time is an important element to making the work. So over time it will change. So for instance, this particular exhibition, I just made a couple purses and added to it. So it'll change over time. And so I was sort of thinking about time and what I was sort of going to do. And these are some of the pieces I was going to make. And I wanted to make another bar. And you'll see a little bit later all this stuff sitting in my barn. And I'm going to make another bar. It's like 10 years later, but I'm still working on it. So I think time has always been an important factor, and I think we all kind of struggle as like, when is the art done? And for me, I've just answered that question. It's never done until basically I'm not around anymore, because I can always sort of add to the pieces, or the piece is bought and then I don't work on it anymore, like the bar. So you'll see these a little later, and from the residency, I was able to be a sabbatical replacement at the University of Wyoming in Laramie. One of the artists, visiting artists that came was James Victore, and he's a graphic designer, and very much like this situation. We have a visiting artist, we're out to the faculty dinner, and we just get to talk, and he's like, well, we should make some stuff together, because he would go to restaurants and he'd bring his Sharpie everywhere, and he draws on stuff. And so we would be like drawing on the plates at the restaurant and then steal the plates from the restaurant. I was like, you don't have to do that. We can like make some. So this is some of his work. And I think why James was so influential to me was one of the things he says is have an opinion, make your art, talk about your opinion and what you want to say. And so these pieces are in the MoMA, and they're about the death penalty. So very serious kind of subject matter, political, and I think that sort of changed the way I was thinking about my work a little bit, just from this sort of collaboration. So over a couple years, I made all these platters, and I loaded them in my truck from Texas and drove them to Brooklyn. This is one of my favorite ones. I own one. I'll show you a little bit later in my studio. But this was a kind of crucial time in my work, and I was thinking about being a sabbatical replacement. I didn't know where I was going to go the next year. I didn't know if I was going to have a job. So I wanted to start making things that I could do in my garage, or a garage space, or, not need a lot of facilities, like one kiln and I can make molds. So I started teaching myself the slip casting process, which is most of this stuff is made here by that. And this is where I began this work. The high heel shoes sort of came from the idea of my mom. One thing Portuguese ladies do when they discipline their children is with shoes. So I'll leave that up to your imagination a little bit. So that's how I started making high heels. And this is sort of some of the pieces I was just starting to make and think about with the process. So I sort of like let the slip casting process give me new ideas for what my next piece was going to be, because I had no idea what I was doing. And so I can't just be paralyzed. I have to make stuff. I'm compulsive about it. So during this time, I got my first tenure-track job at Texas A&M International University. And you can see sort of my studio there, and I have made all these molds and some of my student work there. And so, again, the political that I'm starting to think about is starting to come through in my work and in my students' work. And it's very poignant. This is the border. Laredo's on the border of Mexico. And I was there from 2010 to 2016. And when I left, it got a lot worse. But when I first got there, it was 96% Hispanic. So we're there, and we're the only white people there. And the only other white people there, besides the folks that were at the college, were border control. So you'd go into the market, and it was like people would stare at you and like follow you around, and it was just very strange to be in your own country but feel like a minority and feel very kind of alienated from the culture. And it took a number of years to feel sort of comfortable. And again, this is kind of crossing back across into the United States, and I just can't tell you how profound like the poverty and the amount of money that's there at the same time right next to each other. And it really started to get me to think about politics and some of the issues that were happening in our country, and how I start to put that in my work. So this is one of my students' work, Tessa, And I give this Ceramics 1 project. It's called Fool the Eye or Temptations Project. And so sort of the idea is to build on observational drawing. And so I have everybody bring in some objects, and they make some objects. And then the conceptual sort of prompt to the assignment is make something that tempts you, or make something that you feel, compulsively to do. And so Tessa started, and this is her project in Ceramics 1 on the left here. And so her idea was things that she would do to make herself beautiful. And I don't want to gender it, but hair brushes and mirrors. And then on the right is her thesis exhibition in her 4th year. So she's got all diet pills in these things. She's got a scale with nails on it. So it was really interesting to me how a student could take this one idea, sort of something I was working at in my own work, and then take it 4 years later and make this beautiful creation to something totally new. And she got the opportunity to go to China, to Jingdezhen, which is like another ceramics playground in the world, where it's kind of different because you go as an artist, and all the processes are separated, unlike studio ceramics. So there's a street all the kiln firings. There's a street where all the molds are made. There's a street where all the glazes are made. And so she went as an artist, and she didn't basically make anything. She just came up with the ideas and went to all these different places, and they make the work for you. So it was an amazing experience. And Tess is from Laredo, and this is her thesis exhibition at University of West Virginia. And so these cactuses are very prickly. And her idea was to be, I can't think of the word, but the cactuses survive in this harsh environment. And so she made this sort of piece about her resilience of surviving in a harsh environment. She had a very difficult time being Hispanic and being in West Virginia, sort of the opposite of my feelings of being in Laredo and Texas. So again, the progress of somebody's work is so interesting to me, and this is just one of my best students, and what she kind of solved it with my own ideas. And again, going back to those 3 I's: imitation, incorporating, and then innovating on it and making the work her own. So I talked a little bit about the high heels and my mom, and my mom had mental illness, and so sort of you'll see sort of this with the suitcases. But I was always thinking about my dad, and when I went fishing, I grew up by the ocean, so all the sort of fish hooks were sort of the idea of my dad and my mom, and so that's how this piece sort of started. And again, I don't know what I'm doing when I first start working in the studio. A lot of artists will work very linearly, so they'll come up with an idea, they'll come up with a plan, they'll make a maquette, they'll execute the idea, then they'll show the work. I work very non-linear, so I'll start with an idea, like a high heel shoe that kind of represents my mom and growing up with my mom. And then I think I was going to a job interview once, and I had to do this, a demonstration, and so I just sort of hung the hook and then put the shoes, these primary colored shoes on the ground. It was like a foundations demonstration. And then it just dawned on me, what if I filled the whole room with it? And so then the idea came, this idea about the fisherman, and going back to my friend Lou, he's Chinese, and he has this Chinese proverb that we would always say is, the hunter hunts, but the fisherman waits. So then this sort of installation sort of started to talk about my life in a way that you don't sort of control everything that happens, and a lot of times it's best to wait for the opportunity to come upon you, and I think that sort of was my philosophy, and instead of kind of seeking out something and making something happen, just sort of wait to see what happens. And so that's what sort of the idea of the fisherman is about. And then just from those ideas, again, playing with the shoe and different ways, different possibilities, different things that I could do with installing things. And so this piece is called Out to Dry. And then I'll move a little bit onto the suitcases. So the suitcases, they're colorful, and I call it the optimistic luggage. They're really about mental illness. We all have baggage that we take around with us, and growing up with somebody who is severely mentally ill, my mom growing up, I have some of those things. Like, she has phobias of crocodiles. I don't know why I have phobias, but it's genetic. So I have some of the same things that are going on. I have arachnophobia. But there's other kind of parts of her mental illness that I have too. And so one of the ways I started to kind of think about this baggage was when you have mental illness, there's a stigma to it. There's something that you can't always talk about, and so those things get hidden. and then the idea of the colorful things on the outside. So I started to think about clothes and how we sort of present ourselves and our appearance, but yet what's on the inside is very hidden. So on the left is Kate Spade, and on the right is Gap. So, I'd go to the mall and sort of get ideas from the mall, and sort of put those on the suitcases. And again, the idea is sort of the inner part is very hidden in by our appearances. And it's a very personal piece to me, but in the end, it's sort of like cathartic in that I can send my suitcases and my personal baggage everywhere, and people can experience them, and it's healing in a way, I think. So this piece is called Dependent Attachments, and it's one of those things where I started to think about material as metaphor. So I have the leather straps, and I have the anchors, kind of talking a little bit about being anchored down to something and stuck in something. And I think at the time I was still teaching in Laredo, and I felt very stuck by the job and sort of what they expect you to do as a college professor. And then, when I got married, we kind of got away from Laredo a little bit, and we went to a village in Martha's Vineyard called Menemsha. And so the little fish market's there, and I had lived there in the summer working when I was growing up. And so this sort of idea, a happy idea about the hooks and being a fun place to be, the fish markets. And so I got inspired by my honeymoon. That's where I went for my honeymoon. So again, I'm using the same thing, the hooks, and playing around in my studio and coming up with different possibilities. So the stuff would all be sitting around and hanging out in the studio, and then I'm like, what happens if I just start stacking pieces together? And so then I just started making a bunch of sculptures with different sort of things stacked together. So I took all those anchors and made this sort of very square piece. Those are cocktail cherries, sort of from the bartending iconography. These are some of the high heel shoes. And I really like to experiment with different processes and materials, so I get bored with just doing one thing. So that piece on the left is actually upholstery. So I learned how to do upholstery, and I tufted this big kind of pedestal for my stack shoes. And then I think the other thing I think it's important to do with your artwork is to play around. So the gallery was always empty in the summer. So for a couple weeks in the summer, I was in Laredo. I'd take all my stuff upstairs and then just start every day going to the gallery and just start moving it all around and playing all around and coming up with different possibilities. So I thought about the high heel shoes inside of a suitcase. If I did open the suitcase, what's on my mind? What's inside? I made a lobster crate with all kind of telephones and sort of talking about communication and the idea of the phone. Just sort of iPhones were just sort of, I guess, becoming more permeated in the culture and carrying around. And then I have these life preservers with a net. Just taking different things from things I've made before and coming up with new possibilities that may not necessarily have a great meaning like I had for the fisherman piece, but just, again, playing around. One of the artists that I really truly love and what I do is pop art. So sort of the grandfather of pop art is Andy Warhol. And I love his casual approach to things. And one of the things I like about his work is if you look closely, a lot of his screen prints have that noise of the screen printing process, the smudges, the smears you can see in the work. So I really started to like that. And sort of, even though things are cast and they look so perfect, you'll see my hand in all the work if you look closely. And then the other thing I think is the tongue-in-cheekness of pop art and how it's not so serious all the time. And so I made this piece called 99 Bottles of Beer on the Wall. And then this is when I first started to think about, and you'll see these labels of my Bogus brand. So kind of this boutique idea started to kind of come from that. And so I wanted to sort of do that instead of stickers, and I started screen printing and learning how to screen printing, again, kind of being influenced by Andy Warhol, and how could I put different processes in my ceramic work. So there's lots of different ways you can work with ceramics, and you folks that are in ceramics will know this a little better. So this is one possibility where I screen printed these, this stuff onto, it's like tracing paper, and then you can kind of put it on the pot underneath the glaze. And you can see those boots are like actually the boots I cast. I took a picture and then put that in the screen. And then these are the same prints just sort of made into a decal, which then goes on top of on the ceramics. And you can kind of see this on all the pieces. Like, so the shoes there, they have a decal on top, whereas the skull over there is sort of a decal underneath the glaze. So coming up with different possibilities in the process to make the work more interesting. And then in this piece, you can kind of see all those things at once. So there's things underneath the surface, there's things on top of the surface, and it's just fun to go in the studio and not have to always think about a big idea, but just go and play around and mess around with things, and from that, I think ideas happen. So I started using the lighter back thinking about that project, Fool the Eye Temptations. I like nicotine, and so I tried to quit nicotine several times. I was successful for 9 years at one point. But I thought about the lighters, and as a demonstration piece, whenever I teach my classes, I kind of make demonstration pieces, so I make some of the project along with my students. So this was just one of the pieces I made, and then I sort of made a mold of it and made these lighters, and then one of the places I living in Laredo was next to a park, and so you'd go around the park and you'd see the little drug baggies, you know, and things that were discarded, old lighters and whatnot. So I started picking up some of those baggies and actually making screen prints of them and putting them on my work. So I don't know if you can see maybe on the next one, these little cars. So there's a little drug baggie and they have all little cars on them. So I'd scan those and kind of put those in my work. So I was talking a little bit about addiction with the lighters, and it happened from, you know, just something that, you know, was just a kind of demonstration piece, and then turned into a more, you know, a bigger piece, more thought out, and then I put them in baggies, obviously. So the presentation sort of talked a little bit about the idea of drug bags and whatnot. So again, getting back to the idea of the Bogus Boutique, somewhere in this time I started thinking about my thing being a brand, and so this piece is back over there, and so these B's are actually, instead of Coach, it's a B for Bogus. So I was sort of mocking a little bit of the idea of how brand names, people use brand name things to impress people, and how silly that is. Like, I'm going to drive a BMW, or I'm going to wear my Coach bag. And so I sort of made my brand to kind of mock that a little bit. So I make the Bogus brand for, you know, things that nobody really needs or could use, but if you have them, you have social status. So back to that kind of tongue-in-cheek Andy Warhol aesthetic, or, you know, 99 bottles of beer on the wall. And I think it's just fun way to express my personality, because I'm pretty easygoing, I'm pretty lighthearted, I don't take things too seriously. I think the other thing that sort of always influenced my work is music. Being in the studio, I always listen to music. I get very invested in lyrics and different things I listen to in my childhood and ideas that are in music, and somehow that kind of creeps into my work as I'm making things and working in the studio. Another project I started working on was, you know, I'm trying to get different jobs and learn different processes. So I took my signature and I kind of scanned it into the computer, and then I went to my friend's studio, and he has a router. So he basically, I took my handmade signature and then had a machine cut it into these paddles. So then I made molds from the things that were carved out in the paddles. And then you can kind of see how that looks like when it's cast. Again, just playing around with my Bogus brand and making different products that are funny. So these are my paddles, and you don't have to use them for playing ping pong. There's other games you can play with paddles. And getting a little bit into sort of some of my private life. And I think all the work, and you'll see a little bit as I talk about the dildo belts, but there's also like personal stuff that's in the work. So everything doesn't have to have one meaning. And even my own work, when I think about meaning and concept, there's multiple layers of things as I start to unpack it, you know. My childhood, what I'm feeling in my relationships, or what I want to say about the world right now. So every piece has different sorts of meanings to it, and then also the process. So again, trying to learn different things that I can bring as a teacher and give students different tools that I don't know how to teach until I try it. So this is me giving a demo, and I took a position at the University of Kentucky in 2016. I was really excited to go from working in a department that was music, theater, dance, sort of everything, to a more art department where we had all different mediums, screen printing, bronze casting, the whole thing. And one of the things I started to learn from the printmaking professor was this vinyl cutting. And you can see it on a lot of my work. So, and then again, the Bogus brand there, my Walmart ripoff. So I picked up this vinyl cutting thing, the printmaking kind of process from the printmaking person. And then I started to get into the sculpture area and think about making bronzes. So I have all my slip cast molds, and all you have to do to cast wax in them is soak them in water and pour the wax in just like clay. And then you sort of sprue it up, and this is the investment process. So I just took my lighter mold, took him over there, and you can see this is the sculpture professor. He was 79 when I taught with him in Kentucky. So I just started going to his class and helping him out with the pours, and I got so excited about casting my things in metal. And you can see this is the big burnout kiln, and you can kind of see all the different parts of it. So I cast the thing in wax, you sprue it up, you put it in this kind of thing, and then this cylinder, and then you make your big investment, and then those get burned out, the wax gets burned out in the kiln, and then you can go ahead and pour hot metal into it, which is almost like the wood firing process. And I think that was what got me so excited, is that you can't just make the work by yourself. You need this community. And then there's also sort of, I was talking about it with one of the sculpture professors here, the performative aspect of it. And I just got so excited about hot metal. And it's fun, but it's a lot of work. So you can kind of see that's a high heel shoe right there. So after all the work of casting the bronze, investing in it, doing the pour, you get this thing that looks like that, and it's like you're 1/3 of the way there. So you got to cut off all the sprues, and then I religiously sand those things. So these are my bronzes, my first bronzes that I made about 5 years ago. And you can see sort of I've taken my mold pieces, my molds, and cast things. I took the vinyl cutting from the printmaking professor and sort of put the vinyl on there, and then used the wax to sort of put my name and my brand on it. And then the telephone's back there. So I started mixing up all these different new things I was learning. And I think that's the one thing about being a teaching artist, is that I never want to stop learning. I always want to keep learning new things, new processes, and figuring out how to incorporate that in what I do. One of the things in Kentucky that I thought that really influenced me was doing the wood count out with, his name's Hunter Stamps, and he has this huge wood kiln, and all the students would come out here for a week, and we'd load the wood kiln. It was just like when I went to undergraduate. And so I really got really influenced by Hunter and the way he teaches. He's one of those folks that every day he's the same person, and I'm very emotional. I could be different on different days. So I really got excited about him and working with him, and I think he made me a better teacher. And these are some of the pieces from his wood kiln. And I'm going to build pretty soon at my studio a wood kiln like his. And I'm really happy with the way these turned out. Again, just sort of taking things I've already done and kind of putting that into different processes and seeing how they turn out. They're very different than the colorful things, the wood firing process. But again, that sense of community and that sense of energy that goes into making the work was really important in going forward with what I was trying to do. These are my punk necklaces, and they became part of the Bogus brand. You can see some of them back there. I'll talk a little bit about them as we get going down there, but going back to the James Victoria and like putting your opinion in your piece was really important to me. This is the first setup of the Bogus Boutique, and this was in Corpus Christi. And so, again, time, it changes, and every place it goes to, it's different, and it's exciting to see how different people set it up. And these are some of my newer suitcases. Again, you can kind of see how they change over time based on the different processes and techniques I got to learn from all these great people I've worked with. So some of what I started to kind of think about in my work is advertising and graphic design, and for my Bogus Boutique. So I kind of started putting different ideas into that, and then you can kind of see my Pride Bogus suitcase. So that has some political connotation to it. Some of my life preservers. My Bogus brand shoes. You can see them here. And I'll talk a little bit, again, going back to music and the political message, and what punk rock, and that's what these are, they're punk rock necklaces. If you look way back, you'll see Sid Vicious, he wears that little lock on a chain. So I kind of took that and blew those up into something bigger. But I did it so that I could kind of use the lyrics to sort of what I was thinking. So on the left is the Interrupters, Treat the Youth Right. On the right is Anti-Flag, which is Red, White, and Brainwashed. And so I was sort of thinking about the environment and education. I think a lot of different places that I've taught, education's been defunded, and I think that's been done purposefully. And I think some of those punk rock songs sort of talk about that and how important education is to not just kind of follow the crowd, to kind of think about what you have to say and what you want to express. And I think these are some of my most powerful pieces because I can use the lyrics to say exactly what I'm thinking, even though they're not my own lyrics. So, and they're like, some of the lyrics are from the 80s or whatnot, but they're timeless. They still mean something. So, nationalism, I think, is a dangerous thing, to be so proud of your country that you would do terrible things to other people that aren't from your country. And, obviously war is bad. Possessions never meant anything to me. That's a NoFX song, and I really, again, thinking about material items, material goods, what that means to you, how important that can be in people's lives, and how really, in the end, they don't really mean anything. Because when at the end of your experience, probably you're not going to worry about your diamond rings or whatnot. You're going to worry about your memories. And then the "Don't Call Me White," I think talking about race is very difficult. And I like this song because, when there were certain immigrant groups that came to this country, like Italian people or Irish people, they weren't considered white. But after a certain amount of time, they just got lumped into the white group. And so I think there's something wrong with just calling me white because as I was talking a little bit about Jim, like my family's like, I'm a mutt. Like I have relatives from Portugal, Ukraine, England, Ireland, Germany. My Nana had to flee Nazi Germany because she was Jewish, so she wouldn't die. So there's a lot about packed into race that I think is very toxic. And it's very difficult to talk about without offending anybody. But I think we really need to go back to the idea of identity and embrace the different diversity that we all have within ourselves, and to learn from it and be accepting of everybody. And so I'll leave my race talk about that, but it's a very serious issue and something I have a strong opinion about, and it is hard to talk about. But I can make a fun piece about it from a punk rock song, and it's sort of, I can get the message out, without being too overtly annoying. Sometimes they get censored, though. The punk rocks do get censored, and then the other part that really gets censored is these dildo belts, which I like to call campus carry. So when I was teaching in Laredo in 2016, the Texas legislature wanted to make a law to have students carry guns on campus. And so at UT Austin, these sorority folks made a protest to carry around dildos because owning more than 5 dildos or 6 dildos in Texas is illegal, but you can own as many guns as you want. And there was a lot of strong emotions back then about this issue, the gun control issue, and having students carry guns on campus. And teaching in a ceramic studio and sculpture studio, I just really don't want firearms there. I just don't feel like they belong there. And people can have different feelings about firearms, but I don't want my students having them because I'm just going to give you an A. Like, I don't want to be shot over critiquing your work. But I thought it was a fun way to make these dildo belts to help those nice sorority folks protest guns on campus, because I am very much against it, and so are they. And then I'll show you some of my newer work. I started making these purses, and I'm very much in the stage of like the first point where I cast the high heel shoes just based on my mom. And so I started making the purses based on money and power, particularly power and gender. So I'm still kind of exploring that and figuring out how these purses, what they could be besides being in the Bogus boutique. So hopefully I'll make another installation at some point in the future with these purses. And again, like gender and power and money, all those things are loaded with different possibilities for me. This is a fun piece, not quite fun, but again, another piece that I haven't really fully figured out where it's going to take me. But this piece is about the opioid crisis, and in Massachusetts, I got to be part of this show where you got paired up with somebody who was a victim of the opioid crisis. So you meet with this person, you had trainings to learn about how opioids affect people's brains, and I'll say very quickly, very much people that have a genetic predilection to being addicted to opioids, it happens the first time they take it. So there's really nothing they could do about it. And I've had some friends, close friends die, close friends' lives sort of uprooted by opioids. And so it was a really fun show that I had a lot of personal motivation to do. And so long story short is I put this person's father's, almost like a gravestone on these pills and then piled it up inside like a corpse at a crime scene. Because basically what we both felt is like he was murdered, quite simply, by the pharmaceutical industry, by our government that failed to make laws to stop this crisis. And in nowhere else in the world, no other country has an opioid crisis. So another kind of political message that I could kind of get through with my work, and is, again, very kind of close to my heart, near and dear to my heart. And we'll segue right into the pandemic where I didn't really have a studio during the pandemic. I was teaching at the University of Florida and as a sabbatical replacement. All of a sudden I didn't have a job. All of a sudden my wife didn't have a job. We had to move back to New Jersey. So I didn't really have a place to work, a proper studio for almost a year. So you got to be able to make art. And I think Eddie, my professor, said you got to be able to make art with whatever you have, wherever you go. So I started kind of just using digital work. And so there's my Walmart advertisement. It's very much how I feel about the idea of money and how money sort of makes is the reason for almost every decision in our culture, money. And then I started getting into NFTs because it was really fun. And I think it's a fun way to explore work. I have a lot of different ones. This is my friend Bot playing a harmonica. So I do different fun stuff. And then we're almost done here, but very lucky to sort of the opportunity I had through bartending. Of all paradoxes, I started bartending because I didn't have a teaching job. So, and one of the people I sort of ran across is an old family friend, and we didn't know it at the time, but he had this big barn that I got to rent and have as my studio. Let's see if I can show you my studio. So, super lucky to have this benefactor, another benefactor in my life, let me use this barn as my studio. So this is my current studio right now. We'll take a look around. You can see it's kind of a mess, I always have stuff shipping in and out, huge crates. Give you a little studio tour. This, I had just gotten back from Massachusetts and emptied a storage unit, so all my work is in one place now. I used to have 3 storage units in different parts of the country. We got an old Mustang in the barn. We got some lights. And I've always had my studio in universities and schools. And so when you're working in your studio, you're kind of always working. You're always the professor. But as an artist, I really always don't feel like a professor or having to be responsible or be a pillar of society. So having this my own space almost is back to Providence, where I could just do whatever I want in my studio. We can drink there, we can have a party there. It doesn't matter what we're doing. There's no rules. This is my upstairs. You can see all my stuff. It's kind of crazy. you guys get the idea, right? So there's stuff here from, I have stuff from 1996 when I was in high school. And again, it's just kind of fun to have all this stuff kind of to play around in the studio with. And I'll show you quick, this is Saturday, so this is where I'm at. This is what I'm making right now. Saturday, we did a bronze pour. I ordered a class. I get free tuition at one of the schools I teach at. And so I've made a drug bag purse. And you can see that's what it looks like right now. I have many hours to make it look like shiny gold. And thank you so much.
We're going to let some of these classes got to switch over, but if you guys
I
are
went a
not in
little
a
long.
rush, stick around for just a second. We'll see if we can take a question or two from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you. You went okay? Just do out the cough so I forget to say things, but.
Well, I'm hoping that somebody will ask us a little bit about Slipcasting, but if not, I'm going to. All right, true believers. Thanks for hanging out for a couple of seconds. I wanted to see if any students had any questions for David. Any brave questioners out there, Teresa? Because? Anything you want to know about?
He thinks you're smart, and you got a smart question that'll help everybody else.
Put him right on the spot. Sassy, you got a question?
Thinking of it as I'm saying it, but you spoke a lot about your professors inspiring your work and in graduate school. What were some other things that you thought about during that time that inspired you to continue your education?
I guess I didn't mention that. My mom was an English teacher. My dad was a math teacher. They always told me, don't teach. And I just knew I was always going to be a teacher. And luckily I found, I had a great high school teacher that got me into ceramics. And my town was a pottery town. So that's sort of how it all started. But I think just life. I think just kind of experiencing life and without getting into too much of the nitty gritty, but I was a bad kid. I got into a lot of trouble growing up in high school and in college, and I'll spare you some of the crazier details of it. But those things, and this was before Nintendo had just come out when I was in school, so we didn't have video games, we just made a lot of trouble basically as young kids. So in a lot of ways, art was something that got me out of staying at home and doing what all my friends are still there. They're very good friends that I grew up with. I'm going to Portugal with some of them this summer. But it sort of was like the boat for me, to travel somewhere else and to have a different possibility about life. I was just listening to a podcast this morning about Pink Floyd, the Dark Side of the Moon, just been out for 50 years. And there's a line that in it is no one told you when to run. No one told you when life was starting. You're always preparing for life, something to happen in life. But before you know it, you're already in it. You're already experiencing it. It's right now. And so just kind of taking different things from my life that have happened and kind of putting it into the work. And so there's a lot of it there that I'm not that I'm not talking about because it's personal, and it's not always appropriate for every type of lecture or conversation. So just kind of real personal things or relationships or people that have died close to me. Again, talking about the opioid crisis, those things are in the work for sure. And so I would just say life, in general, never overlook an opportunity in life to kind of have an idea to start playing with in the studio. Even if it's not something you may not really want to talk about. I don't really want to talk about my mental illness, and how I've lost jobs because I have mental illness and how much those suitcases, nobody would really know that. Some people think it's traveling or it's brand or it's, talking about, a critique on corporate America and, all those kind of things. But there's something very deep personal about it. So I think the deep personal thing is something that's a well of different possibilities for my work. Did that answer your question?
I think I was piling a lot of different thoughts in one question.
Okay.
I was interested, you mentioned the suitcases, how the vagueness speaks to a lot of different things for who's observing artwork. It can mean something different.
Right.
Do you think
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have that piece with the high heels, and again, again, the high heels and the suitcases, they're very much tied to my upbringing and how difficult it is to deal with mental illness and the stigmatism of it. And a lot of folks have it, and it's very difficult to talk about because it's so stigmatized. And like, if I was on a job talk, I may not even mention that because I want to get a job, you know? But, and again, these issues are very difficult, and I go back to like James, and the way he has courage to kind of just go out and talk about these difficult things, and it's there, and it's here, you know? It's just, again, like, it's hard to kind of just be straight out and like, but I also think about art is like, if you think about postmodernism and art, it's like many layers of an onion. So there's many layers of meaning. So my interpretations, which I have like maybe 10 for each piece, they're only one part of interpreting the piece. And the viewer is very important. And as a viewer or as a student, you may have an interpretation to it. As somebody writing art history would have an interpretation for it. Somebody owning a gallery may have a different interpretation of it, or a collector. And so to kind of leave it vague enough where people can come to the work and come to their own conclusions and make their own connections is good for business. It's, you know, as an artist, you just want to connect with people. You want to get a reaction out of people. So the worst thing is if people see your work and they have no reaction to it. And again, like I get censored, and I'm like, that's the best thing. I mean, people get upset when their stuff is censored, but I'm happy. You know, I'm like, I've struck a nerve. You know, like I had stuff in a gallery in this place called New Hope, Pennsylvania. It's like a tourist town. It's on the river, and I basically got asked to take some of the locks out because they were too offensive to the people that were in. And I didn't get upset about it. It's just I know I did my job. You know. Even if I didn't have to say explicitly what that meant to me or why I'm saying it. But I touched a nerve, and that's how I know I'm doing my job as an artist.
Anybody else brave enough to ask questions?
I really think it's interesting, like, how you bring in these, like, difficult topics and, like, economically kind of like what you were talking about. When did you feel like I know you talked about, like, the idea coming to you. When did you feel like you were ready to, like, make that step, to, like, put some of those things out there? Because I feel like as artists, like, it's kind of sometimes uncomfortable to, like, do that, and it's so hard. So can you tell us about that process a little bit?
Yeah, again, I think it started with James and seeing his work and like working with him and like just spending time in the studio, talking to him, and it's very difficult because you don't want your piece to be a one-liner. You know, you want to leave enough intrigue or mystery there, but at the same time, as I started to mature, and it's part of my identity. Like I think like the first half of the work I showed you, I'm like figuring out who I am. You know, I don't even when you're in college, when you're I mean, I went to graduate school very young. I was 23 when I got to graduate school, 27 when I left. Very much, I'm kind of still emerging as an adult, and still kind of forming who I am and what my identity is. And at some point, and I think it was sort of like getting the full-time tenure track job, where you kind of have to like be a little, or they try to indoctrinate you, they try to get you to follow the rules, and there's certain things you can say in meetings and not say, and working at different universities, and then at some point just not having fear anymore. And like, I don't care what you think anymore, you know, I just don't care. And I guess as I've matured, and it happens when you get older, you know, in my 30s I cared so much about being judged and what people were going to write about me, and you know, if I was going to get the promotion, if it was, I was going to, have a forever job. And at some point I just abandoned caring and stopped caring about it, you know? And it's a scary thing, because it has real repercussions in your life, your well-being, your health insurance, your ability to pay the rent. And to a large degree, I'm very lucky that I have a very supportive wife who's also an artist. And when, after 12 years of taking care of us, I just been so stressed out and so beaten down by the process. I just had to stop. Otherwise, I was getting very sick, really. And I got lead poisoning at one point, and so I was just really, really sick. And like, I basically got fired from a job because I was sick, and it was terrible. And I think those sort of experiences started to let me get to the point where I'm in my 40s now. I don't care anymore. I'm not going to be homeless. I know I won't be homeless. I may die young. I could still die, but just overcoming fear of judgment, I think, is sort of a difficult place to get to. And it's not like absolute. Like you still get those feelings, but you got to remind yourself, like, I don't care. Remember Bogus? I don't care. And just go for it, and just not worry about what people are thinking, and put as much effort in what you believe in, and being authentic. And that goes back to the very first thing I said about what my work is my identity. And we're always figuring that out. And I think I feel a very different identity in my 40s than I did in my 30s. And that's okay. And I'm sure I'm going to feel different in my 50s and my 60s if I'm lucky to get there. But I think that's what makes the arc of all of my work that I'll do exciting. And what makes me want to wake up every day. And, you wake up every day, and I think, get back to like the purpose. What is your purpose in life? Why are we here? And I know every day why I'm here. I'm here to make art. I'm here to be the best artist I can be. And so every day I wake up and I'm like, what am I going to do today to be a better artist? And that, I think, in some way frees me from caring about that judgment,
Well, we've let David talk for almost a solid hour plus.
I know that's amazing. I'm usually very short, short and sweet.
What I was going to say is, it would be wonderful if you guys have additional questions. Come back at 4:30 when we've had a chance to take a break for a minute. Corner David, seems like a nice guy. Ask him your questions then. It'll give him a chance to get a drink of water and catch his breath. But I encourage you to come back. It's nice when we have artists visiting campus to be able to kind of interact with them one-on-one. These are the types of experiences I'm really happy that we can bring you, because it extends your network of people that you know who are artists. It gives you the ability to think of yourself in new places and different roles. And I think that's really important, especially as you guys are coming through the program, to be able to go, oh, I didn't know. What was the one? Clay Foundation. Oh, the Roswell.
Yeah, the rare.
I like to think of myself as pretty well informed. I'd never heard of Roswell before, so I learned something today.
It is the best. It is, and the one thing I will say about this experience being here, I can't remember a school or a venue that's treated me better than this school, and the generosity that's here. You guys have been amazing, and I'm just so thankful to be able to show here. So thank you for everybody. I mean, you guys have an amazing opportunity for artists here, and I'm definitely going to recommend it to my artist friends and try to get them to apply to show here, because it's a very good opportunity. And again, I can't remember a time that I've been treated better. I mean, and it's not just about the money. It's just the whole process has just been amazing, and you guys did a better job than I could ever think about setting up a show. I like to think of my work as opportunities for people that are setting up to be creative with it. It doesn't have to be a certain way, and whoever's setting it up can kind of be creative and have fun with the work themselves. I mean, I think about this type of piece as being just big crayons to color with in the gallery, and you can do whatever you want with it, because I'm real laid back about it. But it looks amazing, and again, I can't say enough about how good I feel about being treated this way here. It's been awesome.
A couple hours to ruin it.
There's still dinner, right? There's still dinner.
Let's give David one more round of applause.